Welcome to the Your Take podcast. Welcome on in to episode 5 of the Your Take podcast. I'm your host, Ben Stern, and today we'll be debating which finals run is more impressive. Allen Iverson carrying the 2001 Sixers to the finals, or LeBron James carrying the 2007 Cavaliers to the finals. But before we get into our debate, let's quickly recap last time where we debated who would you rather build a franchise around, Luka Doncic or Zion Williamson. For me personally, Luka is an absolute beast. He's an MVP candidate in just his second year in the league. He's going to be an all-NBA first-teamer. He's putting up numbers that have never been seen before by a player so young. But Zion is just an athletic freak. He's broken records in his first 19 games in the league already. For me, if this was 2K and I could turn off injuries, I'd be taking Zion all day. But right now, if I had to pick, with injuries accounted for, Luka Doncic is my man. He's got the safer floor in my opinion. And we've already seen what he can do in only 2 seasons in the league, and he still has even more room for potential. Now let's get into our debate poll results. Congratulations to Jack Quigley, who actually argued that Zion Williamson would be the better player to build around. He received 56% of the votes, so congrats to him. And now let's get into today's debate. And today we'll be debating a topic that many of you have probably not thought about before. Which finals run is more impressive? Allen Iverson carrying the 2001 Sixers to the finals, or LeBron James carrying the 2007 Cavaliers to the finals? What makes this topic so interesting is both AI and LeBron carried 2 teams with very poor supporting cast to the finals. For AI, it was probably the best season of his career statistically speaking, as he won MVP. For LeBron, it wasn't his best season from a statistical perspective, but it was the best team he ever carried to a finals. Both teams wound up coming up just a little bit short, losing to 2 of the best dynasties the NBA has ever seen. The Sixers fell to the Lakers in the second year of their three-peat, and the Cavaliers lost to a Spurs team that was winning their 3rd ring in 5 years. So now we've kind of introduced the topic. Let's meet our debaters, starting with the man who'll be representing LeBron in the 2007 Cavaliers, Brad Lewis.
Yeah, how's it going? My name is Brad. I graduated from Indiana University a few months ago, and I'm originally from Cincinnati, so I grew up supporting all the Ohio sports teams, and obviously for basketball that meant the Cavs. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, because those Cavs rosters were so terrible, that meant I was really just a LeBron fan. So I grew up a huge fan of everything he did for Cleveland, for that team, for the game of basketball, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
And now let's introduce the man who'll be representing AI in the 2001 Sixers, Harrison Saul.
Hey, I'm Harrison. I just graduated from Penn State University recently. Grew up in Lower Merion Township right by Philadelphia. Big fan of all 4 Philadelphia sports teams, especially the Sixers. Allen Iverson happens to be one of my favorite players of all time across any sport, so I'm happy to talk about this.
All right, so Brad won the coin toss, elected to go first. So Brad, start us off and tell me why you think LeBron's finals run with the Cavs in 2007 is more impressive than what the answer did with the Sixers in 2001.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty simple. The way I look at it, there's 2 ways you can think about who had a more impressive performance. There's who had the worst team, and that's probably the bulk of what we'll talk about, who had the worst roster, had to carry less experienced players, worst teammates to the finals. The other thing is who had more impressive individual performance. We're talking throughout the entire regular season, throughout the entire playoffs, and then little things they did, whether it was one game here and there, crucial performance in a clutch game 5 in the playoffs. And what you'll see is that LeBron wins both of those. He played with far worse teammates, both in terms of skill and in terms of experience in the league, experience in the playoffs, experience in big game situations like they had to deal with that season, and he also averaged more rebounds, assists, had a higher field goal percentage, and a better plus-minus than AI did throughout the entire regular season that year and throughout the playoffs. So we'll get more into some of the details later, but it's pretty simple. When you just look at the rosters, objectively, you can see that Cavs roster is worse. And then when you look at everything LeBron did statistically on top of that, it's hard to argue that there was any team that was taken to the finals by a more impressive performance than what LeBron did in 2007 with the Cavs.
So now let's hear the debate and the opening statement from the man who'll be representing AI in the 2001 Sixers. So Harrison, tell me why the Sixers run was more impressive than what the player that many people consider to be the GOAT, LeBron, did in 2007.
So right now, for the story you're getting, it may seem like Allen Iverson's road to the finals was easy. But, just to start my introduction off, I want to, make this a little bit of a story. So in the summer right before that 2000-2001 season, the Sixers organization was nearly falling apart. 2 seasons prior to this, it was either a 17 or 18 win season. and they had been first-round exits the 2 years before that. They kept running into teams like Toronto, Indiana, Milwaukee, and New Jersey, who had shut them out. And their new coach at the time, Larry Brown, who had just been there for 2 years, was butting heads with Allen Iverson, who's this guy from the streets, who brought this new culture to the NBA, this new style of play. And things weren't working out between the two. And it was in the midst of this offseason that the Sixers actually were about to trade Allen Iverson away to the Pistons. However, the big white guy, Matt Geiger, off the bench, halted this trade when he wouldn't waive his no-trade clause. And this was the beginning of one of the most miraculous seasons seen by any player ever in the NBA in 6 foot flat, 165-pound Allen Iverson. Iverson, throughout this season, managed to put up 31 points per game, one of only 7 players in the 2000s to put up over 30 points per game, 2.5 steals per game, which also led the league, 3.6 rebounds per game, and 3.8 assists. And this was all while playing 42 minutes a game in 71 regular season appearances. And this season was a true test of Allen's talent as he found himself on a team that was stripped away of all other scorers. Larry Hughes recently, and Jerry Stackhouse, who was traded for Theo Ratliff, Aaron McKee, and Eric Montross. And they picked up Eric Snow so Allen could be moved from point guard to shooting guard, something that was new to him, but they felt could allow him to score the most. And there are a bunch of, bumps in the road for Allen Iverson. Starting big man Theo Ratliff, who was the second highest scorer on the team, was hurt 61 games into the season, and they had to trade him and Tony Kukoc, the only good three-point scorer and the only other player who was averaging over 12 points per game for the season, away to the Hawks for Dikembe Mutombo. And despite this, Allen Iverson led the Sixers to an NBA appearance where they were able to give the Lakers their only loss in the playoffs in the middle of their three-peat. A scoring title, All-Star Game MVP, all while he was the only Sixers player to average more than 12 points per game on that whole entire roster. And the Sixers were still the second best record in the league at 56 wins, and they made it all the way to the finals, like I said, where, he solidified his performance in history with a step over of Tyronn Lue. So, just before we get into the arguing, Allen Iverson's 2001 campaign was one ridden with injuries, both within himself and on the team. And in contrast, LeBron's 2006-07 campaign, which was also similarly his fourth NBA season, featured a much less competitive Eastern Conference, where the Cavs still had a worse record and finished second in the league. Second in the East, which was much weaker. And overall in the league, they also finished fifth. And when you take a deeper look at this, Allen Iverson, he won MVP for a reason. LeBron got 0 first-place votes. That's all I have to say.
All right, guys. Thank you for those opening statements. Great to hear both of your opinions. So, one of you guys want to start off defending your take? Maybe respond to the other person and explain why your guy had the more impressive run.
Yeah, I want to talk about one thing you said. So you said they had to trade for Dikembe Mutombo, and despite this, made it all the way to the finals. Despite having Dikembe Mutombo, I think that's a ridiculous thing to say. He was a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest big men of all time, who happened to be an All-Star in that season. Yes, you had to trade away injured All-Star Theo Ratliff, but you traded him for another All-Star.
He also won Defensive Player of the Year, Brad. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you. Also won Defensive Player of the Year. You added an All-Star Hall of Famer to your roster, and you're saying despite that, he was able to bring them through to the finals. I think having Dikembe Mutombo alone solidifies this argument in favor of LeBron. Let's look at who some of the people were on both these teams and look at some of their stats. Go ahead.
If you're looking at how they were supporting the players, though, if you're looking at the Cavs, meanwhile, while Anderson Varejao or Big Z never won a Defensive Player of the Year, Big Z was still an All-Star. He still averaged, I think it was upwards of 16 or 17 one season, and Varejao, too, was a man who could score. What'd you say?
He was an All-Star in 07, though.
Yeah, he wasn't. He was either a year or two before that. And I think that when the help comes in, sure, the Sixers were a very defensively sound team. When it came to scoring, Theo Ratliff, he could shoot a little bit. He could crash the rim. He wasn't like Dikembe, who could just block shots. The Sixers had to make a last-second trade, and it changed the whole roster up. That whole team, Allen Iverson was playing with more new players than LeBron James was.
Yeah, sure, he made some trades. Mutombo still averaged double digits that year in points and rebounds. And when you look at plus minus for a bunch of these players. So really just like how well the team fared while they were on the court. Only 2 guys other than LeBron on that Cavs team had a positive plus minus. That means they couldn't even field a starting 5 full of people who were valuable additions to the court for that team. AI had 8 other players besides him, 9 including him on that roster that had a positive plus minus. That's a far deeper team full of guys who are actually helping, who are actually valuable to have on the court in addition to him, whereas LeBron had to shoulder all of this burden of being the only guy amongst maybe two others on the court who are actually creating a valuable impact for the team.
But it's at this point that, you have to look at that Allen Iverson playing 42 minutes per game. There's only 6 minutes of the game that he was off the court. So maybe you could also say that plus minus of his teammates was a reflection of his ability to be, prolific on the court and be the lifeline of the offense.
Sure, and I mean, and he scored more than LeBron, but he significantly more. I think if you look at efficiency, like LeBron shot a higher field goal percentage all year, and yeah, he scored less, but it's because he shot less and averaged 8 assists a game almost and got other players involved. And so just AI was out there chucking up 40, 50 shots a game, and of course he was going to win the scoring title and even the MVP because he's fun to watch. He's putting up explosive numbers, but LeBron was out there doing it efficiently and doing it with fewer guys on the team to help him out.
But Allen Iverson, he was still shooting upwards of 40% from the field. And then in the playoffs, he notched it up when he's in the finals. He shot 40% from the field. Why was it that LeBron, when it came to the playoffs, everything went down, even his shooting averages?
Well, so, LeBron, both of those players in their playoffs led the entire playoffs that season in points and assists. Right. LeBron did that. And LeBron averaged 25, 8, and 8 throughout the playoffs. AI, and he had a positive plus minus, was 3.6. AI had a 0 plus minus throughout the playoffs. So yeah, he put up 33 points a game. There's only 5 rebounds, only 6 assists, and a 0 plus minus throughout the entire playoffs. Whereas LeBron, 25, 8, and 8, 3.6 plus minus. I just think it was according to the numbers, he was just way more valuable on the court, whether it's in the regular season or the playoffs. And again, he was doing it with guys who were less valuable in addition to him.
I think that it's when you bring up things like plus minus, you have to look at how injured Allen Iverson was, throughout the season. He had a hip injury. He had elbow bursitis. He had a knee sprain. And it was in Game 7 of the second round of the playoffs that he did re-aggravate that shoulder sprain. And then he still came out, and in Game 1 of the conference finals, he played 42 minutes. Then he played 48 minutes in Game 2. So it's a show of heart. This guy put everything out there, and the stats don't show everything.
Yeah, but so that's part of why I just sort of looked at some of the other players on the teams and some of the individual performances. And so we talked about Mutombo already, but there were 2 different guys throughout the starting 5 that season who had been all-stars in their career or were all-stars. Cavs only had one other guy who had ever been an all-star, and it was 2 years ago. From their starting 5 who'd been an all-star team. And then we look at what they were able to do individually.
To be fair,
yes,
AI did only play with one all-star at a time because they did trade. They had.
And if you want to look at this from a scoring standpoint too, Allen Iverson played with only one player or 2 players that had ever even went over 11 or 12 points per game in their career. Meanwhile, Allen Iverson, for LeBron, while Larry Hughes never was an all-star, he still did post over 20 points per game at points in his career. And over his career, I'm sure he's between 15 and 20 points per game. You got guys like Donyell Marshall, who averaged over 15 points per game at points in their career. I think it's worth noting that Allen Iverson was pushed out of his comfort zone, needing to chuck up threes. And this was also the 2001 season was the last season that the 3-second rule was allowed. So for a guy his size that couldn't shoot, it's pretty miraculous that, he had to go up against guys like Shaq that could just park themselves under the hoop.
And just to be fair, this was year 8 of Larry Hughes, year 12 of Donyell Marshall. So if we're talking primes, they might have been a little bit outside of that. But even we can go away from some of the other players that they played with because we can kind of go back and forth on that. I also want to look at things they did specifically in the playoffs to get guys to get their team all the way into the finals. And yes, I know AI averaged more points, but I don't think you can not mention what LeBron did in the finals against Chauncey Billups' Pistons, one of the better teams the NBA had seen throughout that decade, and putting up in a crucial Game 5, tied 2-2, 25 straight points and 29 of it last 30 for the Cavs to win that game in double overtime and then ended up winning Game 6 and taking the series and going all the way to the finals. That just shows that when he needs to put his foot on the gas and take all the scores, he was able to do that just like AI was. And when he needed to take a back seat, shoot well, and average 8 assists a game, even with nobody around him, he could do that too.
I think getting into the playoffs a little bit, we kind of can see two kind of different. I think LeBron was a little more consistent in the 07 playoffs than AI was, but I think AI definitely had maybe some higher highs, but also some lower lows as well. You kind of look at LeBron, kind of focus back in on that Pistons series, as Brad was talking about. The Cavaliers returned to Cleveland down 2-0 in the series and went on to win 3 straight games. From Game 3 to Game 5, LeBron averaged 35 points, 9 assists, over 8 rebounds, and shot 52% from the floor over those 3 games to bring the Cavs back from a 2-0 deficit to eventually win the series 4-2. As Brad mentioned, in that crucial Game 5, he dropped 48 points in double overtime to kind of give the Cavs control of the series and ultimately win and advance to the finals. You kind of take a look at Allen Iverson. You see some crazy games as well, but he would a lot of time follow up those crazy games with some much poorer performances. For example, in Game 2 of the Eastern Conference semifinals against the Toronto Raptors, Allen Iverson scored 54 points, which is tied for the 11th most ever in a playoff game. And the Sixers won Game 2 after being down 1-0. However, he responded in Game 3 by going 7 for 22, posting a -20 differential. The Sixers get blown out. In Game 5, and the series was tied 2-2, AI dropped 52 points, which was tied for the 17th most all-time in a playoff game. But he responded in Game 6 by going 6 for 24, -20 differential, and the Raptors forced the Game 7, which the Sixers ultimately won to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. But there again were some big highs and big lows in that Bucks series as well. Specifically, Game 2, AI goes 5 for 26. Game 5, AI goes 5 for 27. He did put up 46 in Game 6 and 44 in Game 7, but there were those really low moments as well that he had that LeBron definitely did not have as weak of shoot performances as AI did, although he did have some not so great games as well, but they were both young players at the time.
I would say the finals was a pretty low performance where they only managed to break 80 points.
I remember the argument being who took a worse team, what was more impressive getting to the finals. So we could, credit to AI for taking a game from that Lakers, but we were talking about who's more impressive getting to the finals, not what happened once they got there. And I don't think the finals was part of it.
I think you have to look at the season overall. I think for Allen, you can't just wipe away the achievement of being able to say that, they went into the Staples Center and gave Shaq and Kobe their only loss in that whole playoff run. And while Allen Iverson did have some bad games, it was because the guy was playing every minute of the game nearly. And he had to put up his team's, he had to put up 2/3, a quarter of his team's points. And that's why, when he didn't perform, they couldn't win. It was all on him. There was no backseat that could be taken.
Yeah, but I mean, he's playing with guys who are competent basketball players. If you can set them up, you could average more assists per game, especially a guy who's going to take that much of the burden from the defense. Everyone knows AI is going to shoot 20 shots a game. So whereas if he were to take more of the LeBron's approach, shoot a little more efficiently, find a couple guys open for threes, then things are a little bit different.
But we didn't have any guys that were shooting, more than 3 attempts per game from behind the arc, which is why Iverson was shooting over 4 attempts throughout the playoffs, which is something he hadn't done. And the injuries too, going into the playoffs, Aaron McKee had to start over Eric Snow, who was the starter that whole season. And even then, Aaron McKee was still injured. George Lynch, who was starting, was sidelined for the finals. Tyrone Hill had to start. Both teams were scrappy. There were a lot of no names. But I think Allen Iverson's team, the lineup was different nearly every night. Can that be said about the Cavs?
I mean, sure. You're right. LeBron had more consistency in his roster, but I think you have it backwards. You're saying that guys were only shooting 2 shots from behind the arc a game, which is why AI had to shoot 4. I think it's the other way around. Because AI is just pulling jumpers and shooting 7 for 22, there aren't shots for other guys to take. That's my point, is that, yes, LeBron would score less because he was a little bit more efficient about it. He went about his game a different way, getting other players involved. But we've seen, like we talked about in that Pistons series, that when he needs to step up, he absolutely can. And again, that's the other part of this argument where I think if you look at the rosters and you look at what the supporting cast on each team did, I think it's pretty objectively clear how it was worse for the Cavs. And then on top of that, LeBron was able to step up when he needed to go say, all right, I'm the guy. I'm going to go get us 25 straight and get us all the way, propel this team to the finals. He could do that too, which is why I think it's pretty clear that Cavs team and taking them to the finals is one of the most impressive feats that we've seen.
I do think that adversity is definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration a little bit when talking about which was more impressive. I know that Harrison kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but we haven't really touched on it since. The Sixers were about to trade AI before the season even started. Him and Larry Brown were butting heads so much that, and they were able to put their differences aside and ultimately make a finals run. I know you mentioned the injuries as well, the changing roster, the changing lineup. So I do agree that LeBron might have had the weaker roster, but when you look at the adversity side of things, I think that definitely this is what the Sixers overcame to get to the finals. The problems the roster had, the problems they had with the coach, it definitely is that in itself is another impressive feat to consider.
I mean, sure, yeah, and like can't under the problems with the coach. There weren't really any that we knew about for that Cavs team, but let's be clear that some of the problems that roster faced, they fixed by, and some of the injuries that they fixed by trading for All-Star Hall of Famer Dikembe Mutombo. So it wasn't like they were completely just parts that they threw together. And yes, it was a different roster all the time, and yes, they were interchangeable parts, but some of the ways that they were able to deal with some of that was by bringing in incredible star talent to help support AI that LeBron never had.
One incredible star talent,
right? Which is one more than the Cavs team had. So.
Arguably.
All right, guys. I think we're starting to get close to the end of the debate here, so I'm gonna give each of you guys one last opportunity to plead your case. So, Brad, why don't you start us off for the last time? Tell me why what LeBron did with the 07 Cavs is more impressive than what AI did with the 01 Sixers.
Yeah, so we said it all here, but I would challenge anybody listening to this to go and look up the roster for that team and just look at some of the numbers and statistics and even just the names of the guys that LeBron had to play with. So it can't overstate that Sixers team also had a pretty bad supporting cast. Yes, they had other things going on, but I challenge you to look at the numbers and you'll see how much worse that Cavaliers roster was and how much more LeBron had to do. And then I challenge you to look at some of the things he did that year and some of the teams he beat throughout the playoffs and some of the performances he put on to beat those teams in the playoffs and how consistent and efficient he was able to do it at such a young age in a town that hadn't won any kind of sports title in who knows how long. So everything we talked about between who had the worst roster and the more impressive individual performances, I think it's pretty clear it's LeBron for both.
All right, Harrison, take us home. Why is what AI did in 01 more impressive than what LeBron did in 07?
So, to wrap this all up, I want to say Allen Iverson's 2001 campaign was one of the most iconic single-season performances of any player of all time. And, it's no question, why he received MVP. And you want to look at it, LeBron James got no votes. It's seasons like this and performances like that game one of the finals, people like LeBron James to call Allen Iverson the pound-for-pound GOAT. Allen Iverson led a ragtag team of guys. If you want to say the Cavs had, random roster, Kevin Ollie, you might think of him as the UConn head coach. He got minutes in that NBA Finals. Rajah Bell. So, despite facing the numerous injuries throughout the season, both Allen Iverson himself and the team at 165 pounds, he led the Sixers through the titans of the NBA, Ray Allen, but he ultimately came up short to the Lakers with Shaq and Kobe, who would go on to win the finals the following season. And a season of such really can't be compared to LeBron. I think the 2007 finals performance by LeBron is one that even he would want to forget about. These were two fourth-year players, and one was clearly ready to lead the team and be the face of the NBA, and one wasn't. And Allen's ultimate pitfall, kind of like you pointed out, Brad, was that he couldn't play with other scorers. Maybe if he was able to play with somebody like Larry Hughes, Melo, Stack, he would have had a finals. But so what if? That's it.
All right, guys.
What happened? This isn't part of the voting. Don't forget that.
This is an argument that I think this is definitely a great argument between both of you guys. Thank you for offering your interesting points, your interesting takes. But now, again, fans, the debate now shifts to you. Make sure to click the link in the Your Take Podcast bio at Your Take Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and Your Take Podcast on Facebook to have the opportunity to cast your vote for who won the debate between Brad and Harrison. Hope you guys all liked listening to this debate. We'll have more debates, more episodes coming in the coming weeks. I'm not exactly sure what the upcoming topics will be. Be sure to be on the lookout on Instagram and Twitter for what the upcoming debate topics will be. We got some more exciting debates, more exciting things in store coming up in the coming weeks. Finally, if you want the opportunity to come on the show and debate your hot takes and your hot opinions like Brad and Harrison just did, DM me on Instagram or Twitter at YourTakePod or comment on upcoming debate questions I'll be posting. the comments with the most likes, the ones that I find the most interesting. I'll reach out to you and invite you onto the show to debate your take. So thank you, Brad and Harrison, again for this fantastic debate, and I'm looking forward to the more that we have in store in the coming weeks. Hope you guys all have a great night.